In 1950, one of the largest machine tool manufacturers in America bought a struggling lathe maker out of Ottumwa, Iowa. The company was called Atlas Press. The founder of the lathe company was a former commercial artist named Paul Clausing, and the deal did not even pay him enough to retire on. Atlas figured they were absorbing a solid regional brand with nice products and a loyal following. What nobody at Atlas understood was that the Clausing name carried more weight with professional machinists than the Atlas brand ever had. Within 20 years, Atlas would erase its own identity from every building, every nameplate, and every piece of corporate letterhead in the company, and replace it with his. This is Trade Archive, where we cover the stories behind the machines that built the modern world. If you are into that, hit like and subscribe so you do not miss the next one. To understand how a farm kid from Iowa ended up owning the name of a corporation that swallowed him, you have to start with the corporation itself. And the story of Atlas Press begins not with a boardroom or a business plan, but with a bitter feud between an inventor and a dead man's son-in-law. In the late 1880s, two brothers named Charles and Gardner Eames ran a small operation in Racine, Wisconsin, manufacturing wooden split pulleys. The business failed. They relocated to Kalamazoo, Michigan, where Gardner established the G.T. Eames Company around 1893 and started producing a tool called the Yankee drill grinder. He held the patent on it. He ran ads in the Iron Trade Review. He was a capable engineer with a real product. But Gardner Eames had a problem that would follow him for the rest of his career. He was better at building machines than building businesses. By 1911, Eames had conceived an entirely new kind of industrial press, an improved compound arbor and mandrel press used for assembling and straightening collars and bearings on shafts. It was the kind of tool every automotive and industrial shop needed. But he did not have the money to manufacture it at scale. So he brought in a partner named Herbert Everard. Everard was a Kalamazoo institution. He had attended Kalamazoo College, trained as a printer, and built serious wealth-running Eichling Bros. Everard Company, one of the leading manufacturers of regalia for the Masons and other fraternal organizations. He served on the Kalamazoo School Board and helped introduce kindergarten and manual training to the city's public schools. He was the kind of man who showed up to business meetings in a suit and expected to run the room. The two men formalized a new company in late 1911 with $15,000 in capital stock. Eames handled the engineering. Everard handled the money. The arbor press received its patent in September 1912, and orders started rolling in immediately. Then, in June 1913, Everard traveled to a paper plant in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario. A staircase collapsed beneath him. He was severely injured and died days later at the age of 55. His controlling share of the company passed to his daughter and her husband, a man named John H. Penniman. Penniman and Eames clashed almost immediately. Eames was an inventor. Penniman was a businessman with no patience for workshop tinkering. Within a short time, Eames sold his entire share of the company to the Penniman family for $5,000. Penniman moved the operation to new quarters in Kalamazoo, renamed it the Atlas Press Company, and set about turning it into something much bigger than a single patent shop. Eames, for his part, refused to disappear. He opened a rival machine shop, kept building presses, and kept using the old trademark. In 1919, the Pennimans took him to court. The case, Atlas Press Company versus Eames, went all the way to the Michigan Supreme Court. The court ruled that Eames had to stop using the trademark, but allowed him to keep his specific design improvements. Eames tried to relaunch under a new name, first as the Kalamazoo Arbor Press Company, then relocating to Evansville, Indiana, as the Evansville Arbor Press Company. By 1923, he had vanished from the industrial record entirely. Gardner Eames built something real, and then he lost every piece of it. Penniman, meanwhile, had the trademark, the factory, and the momentum. Through the 1920s, Atlas Press expanded rapidly into drill presses, small metal lathes, and woodworking tools like jointers. In 1934, Atlas locked down a contract that would define the company for the next 2 decades. They began manufacturing machinery for Sears, Roebuck and Company, sold under the Craftsman, Companion, and Dunlap brand names. Suddenly, Atlas products were in the Sears catalog, in hardware stores across the country, and in the basements and garages of a generation of American hobbyists. By the time the United States entered World War II, the federal government had become Atlas's biggest customer, and the company was in a strong financial position from war production. But Atlas was not a company that inspired loyalty among the people who actually used its machines for a living. Professional machinists had a clear hierarchy. At the top sat names like Monarch, LeBlanc, and Lodge and Shipley, the heavy industrial iron. Below them were companies like South Bend, which made a solid, widely available lathe that dominated the small shop and serious hobbyist market. Atlas sat below all of them. The Sears connection gave Atlas volume. It did not give Atlas credibility on the production floor. Machinists called Atlas products the all-amateur tier, and they weren't being gentle about it. That distinction would matter enormously when Atlas crossed paths with a man who had spent his entire adult life trying to earn exactly the kind of respect that no Sears catalog badge could ever deliver. Paul Clausing was born near the end of the 19th century and grew up on a small farm in rural Hardin County, Iowa. He didn't go to engineering school. He didn't come from money. By the 1920s, he was working as a commercial artist for a company called the Monarch Film Company, starting in Osage, Iowa, before the firm moved to Waterloo and then to Kansas City, Missouri. He was good with an airbrush. He could hand letter signage. He could touch up photographs so cleanly that you couldn't tell where the original ended and his work began. These weren't throwaway skills. Years later, when Paul was running his own lathe company, he used that same airbrush to retouch product photographs for his own sales catalogs and advertisements. He designed the marketing materials himself because he couldn't afford to hire anyone else, and because he was better at it than most people he could have hired anyway. But Paul Clausing's real obsession wasn't film or commercial art. It was metal. Around 1928, he purchased a South Bend metal lathe and installed it in his basement. He spent night after night operating that machine, learning its capabilities and, more importantly, its limitations. Paul became convinced that he could design something better, a lathe that was more accurate, more rigid, and more affordable than anything currently available to small professional shops. The South Bend machines that dominated the American market ran on plain sleeve bearings and required manual change gears for threading. Paul believed he could do better on both counts. The timing, though, was catastrophic. Paul married Hilda at Christmas in 1925, and by 1931, the United States was at the absolute bottom of the Great Depression. Despite every rational argument against it, Paul and Hilda found a tiny manufacturing building at Lillian and Keota Streets in Ottumwa, Iowa. The building was about 2,000 square feet, with an apartment above it where the family lived. Most of the purchase money came from funds Hilda had received from her parents when she turned 21. According to family history, it wasn't a fortune. It was enough to buy a struggling building and fill it with a handful of machines. Paul's brother Otto arrived in March of 1932 to help. Otto was 3 years older, a carpenter who had been building expensive homes in Kansas City. He had a mechanical intuition that complemented Paul's design sense perfectly. As a child, Otto had repeatedly disassembled and reassembled the family pendulum clock without his parents ever knowing. For the first 5 years, the Clausing Manufacturing Company couldn't afford to build the lathe Paul had designed. They survived by manufacturing compound slide rests for a company called Duro and by turning out cheap woodworking lathes sold through Sears. Every dollar that came in went back into tooling, materials, and slow, methodical preparation. The factory expanded from 2,000 to 4,000 square feet in 1937, and then to 7,000 square feet by 1940. On June 8, 1936, the Clausing Company finally shipped its first true metal turning, screw-cutting lathe. It was a compact, precision-built machine that would evolve into the Clausing Series 100. It could cut threads, face stock, bore holes, and turn metal to tolerances that the Sears catalog lathes couldn't touch. Paul kept improving it. On December 3, 1937, he placed an order for Timken taper roller bearings, replacing the plain bearings used by competitors like South Bend. It was a deliberate, calculated upgrade. Timken bearings held tighter tolerances under load, lasted longer, and gave the Clausing lathe a measurable technical edge that professional machinists noticed immediately. By May of 1940, Paul had designed and shipped a quick-change screw-cutting gearbox that eliminated the tedious process of manually swapping change gears for different thread pitches. Production climbed steadily. In September of 1939, the shop was turning out 11 lathes a month. By mid-1942, with wartime demand surging, they were building 70 lathes a month. In March of 1944, they hit 100. By January of 1947, they were pushing 133. The war transformed the operation. On December 24, 1941, 17 days after Pearl Harbor, a heeled bore matic arrived at the Ottumwa factory and was immediately placed on the War Production Board roster. Clausing lathes were being used to machine precision parts for military equipment. In October of 1941, just weeks before the United States formally entered the conflict, a clausing lathe appeared in the Saturday Evening Post in an article about a machinist making steel bushings and spindles for anti-tank guns. It was the kind of exposure money couldn't buy, and it came not from advertising, but from the machine showing up where the work was hardest. The original Keota Street factory was overwhelmed. In May of 1945, Paul purchased a new site on the banks of the Des Moines River, directly across from the Irving Elementary School. Brickwork started on January 11, 1946, and by late May, the company had moved into a 21,000-square-foot building at 235 Richmond Street. Paul had checked the historical flood records before buying the site. The data showed that the worst flood on record would never have reached the factory floor. He verified this specifically. He was a careful man. The data was wrong. In the summer of 1947, the Des Moines River produced the worst flood in the recorded history of Ottumwa. Water surged past every historical benchmark and poured into the brand-new clausing factory until it stood almost 3 feet deep across the production floor. Hilda's diary, which she had kept since 1935 and which remains the principal first-hand record of the company's early years, documented the disaster. With barely any warning, Paul, his foreman Fred Sutton and Roy Kirk, and the floor workers waded through muddy, waist-deep water, physically hoisting heavy cast-iron lathe beds, gearboxes, and electric motors above the rising water line. These were not small objects. A single lathe bed weighed hundreds of pounds. They saved what they could. They lost what they couldn't. The factory was eventually shoveled out of the river mud and restored to working order. But the financial damage was severe. Then, before the company could fully recover, the United States slid into a sharp post-war recession in 1949. Despite shipping a completely redesigned and highly capable lathe on March 31, 1949, the new Series 200 with a 1-inch collet capacity, the back-to-back blows of the flood and the recession had drained the company's reserves. Paul Clausing was building the best small lathes in America, and he was running out of money to keep doing it. In September of 1950, Atlas Press Company came calling. The meeting took place at the Drake Hotel in Chicago, where Paul sat across from Atlas President John Penniman and Executive Vice President Ed Marsland. The deal closed shortly after. According to family accounts, the price wasn't enough to set Paul and Hilda up for life, but it was enough to stop the bleeding. They invested a substantial fraction of their proceeds into Atlas common stock the following year, believing deeply in the combined potential of the two companies. It was a bet on the future of the brand Paul had built, even if he no longer controlled it. They would eventually sell most of that stock in 1967 during a price run-up, turning a modest profit on the deal that had started as a surrender. Initially, the Ottumwa plant continued to operate under the hybrid name Atlas Clausing, with about 100 employees. Paul's title was effectively office manager, a role that had nothing to do with designing or building lathes. He handled union relations and administrative paperwork, while Atlas executives in Kalamazoo made the engineering decisions. By every account, he was miserable. But something unexpected was happening on the sales floor. Atlas tried putting its own name on the clausing lathes. Professional machinists pushed back. They didn't want Atlas iron. They wanted clausing iron. The distinction mattered to them because they knew, from direct experience on the shop floor, that clausing machines held tighter tolerances, ran smoother under load, and lasted longer than anything Atlas had ever stamped its own name on. Atlas was the Sears catalog brand, the hobbyist tier. Clausing was professional grade. The nameplate reverted back to clausing. In February of 1957, Ed Marsland traveled to Ottumwa to deliver news that would end the company's 26-year history in Iowa. Atlas was consolidating. All closing lathe production would move to a larger facility in Warsaw, Indiana. On January 18, 1958, Otto Closing, along with key personnel including Bill Defford, Roy Kirk, Fred Sutton, and Howard Weidman, left Ottumwa with the plant equipment. Paul and Hilda sold the empty Richmond Street building to a knife manufacturer who wanted to be closer to the John Deere factory in Ottumwa. The original closing factory was gone. Otto never came back to Iowa. He continued working at the Warsaw plant until his death on June 14, 1960. Paul returned to painting and mechanical tinkering in Ottumwa. He died there on March 15, 1973. Hilda outlived him by 18 years. But the name Paul Closing built kept climbing. Through the late 1950s and the 1960s, Atlas Press systematically shed its lighter product lines. In 1956, Atlas formally associated with Colchester of Great Britain, bringing European engineering into the product range. In 1961, Atlas sold the entire woodworking tool division to Black & Decker, which had just acquired DeWalt. The company was deliberately walking away from the hobbyist market that had made it rich, because the professional market that closing represented was where the margins were, and where the reputation mattered. In the fall of 1969, Atlas Press Company formally and permanently changed its corporate name to the Closing Corporation. The company that had once pushed out Gardner Eames for $5,000, that had built its fortune selling rebranded tools through the Sears catalog, erased its own name entirely. It became Closing Industrial, Incorporated. The farm kid from Hardin County won. What earned that kind of loyalty was the iron itself. Machinists are not sentimental people. They don't stick with a brand because of advertising or nostalgia. They stick with a brand because the machine holds tolerance after 10,000 hours of use, because the spindle doesn't wobble, because the bed doesn't flex under a heavy cut. Closing earned its reputation one specification at a time. The Closing 5900 series 12-inch lathe, produced in large numbers from the late 1960s onward, became arguably the most recognizable manual lathe in American mid-century manufacturing. The bed was flame-hardened and ground to a precision finish. The forged chrome steel headstock spindle was bored to 1 3/8 inches and ran on zero-precision Timken taper roller bearings. The variable speed drive system used a hydraulic mechanism, allowing operators to adjust spindle speed from 52 to 2,000 revolutions per minute on the fly via a dial on top of the headstock. For work holding, the machine accepted English Bernard multi-size collets, each spanning a 1/8-inch gripping range, accommodating both imperial and metric stock without switching setups. In machinist forums today, decades after production ended, the 5900 is still called the best 12-inch lathe ever made for serious shop work. On Practical Machinist, one user put it plainly: the South Bend is a consumer lathe, the Closing is a professional tool. Another said he would trade a South Bend 9A for a comparable Closing without hesitation. South Bend still has better parts availability on the used market. But for precision and rigidity under load, machinists consistently rank Closing a full tier higher. The one consistent complaint is the hydraulic variable speed unit, which has no available replacement parts and eventually fails on every machine that runs long enough. The Closing 8520 vertical knee mill, introduced in the mid-1960s, achieved a different kind of status. It was a compact machine, around 650 to 750 pounds, depending on configuration, designed to deliver the versatility of a full-size Bridgeport-style knee mill in a package small enough to fit in tight laboratories and R&D shops. According to factory specifications, the Morse taper 2 spindle ran to within 2 10,000ths of an inch of true. The table stayed parallel to the turret within 1,000th. The travel surfaces maintained flatness within 5 10,000ths over 8 inches. For horologists, prototype machinists, and home shop enthusiasts who needed real milling capability in a confined space, the 8520 was the machine that made it possible. It remains one of the most sought-after small mills on the used market. In drilling, Closing elevated what most companies treated as a secondary product into a production workhorse. The Model 2276 and Model 2277 20-inch variable speed floor drill presses featured a massive 66-inch column, a No. 3 Morse taper spindle supported by 8 ball bearings, and infinitely variable speed from 150 to 2,000 revolutions per minute. The machines were rated for sustained, high-torque drilling through cast iron and structural steel, the kind of work that would stall or destroy a consumer-grade press. Beyond the toolroom, closing expanded into heavy fabrication. The Kalamazoo horizontal bandsaws became standard equipment in structural steel shops running multi-shift billet cutting. The metal muncher ironworker line, including machines rated up to 100 tons, could shear, notch, and punch through thick structural steel plate with tooling that swapped in minutes. And through its decades-long association with the British 600 Group, Closing distributed the Colchester Student and Harrison Center lathes, machines that became the worldwide standard for mechanical engineering education. The Colchester Student, with its enclosed geared headstock, splash lubrication, and integrated safety features, exceeded DIN 8606 toolroom standards and became the machine that entire generations of machinists learned their trade on. Speaking of the 600 Group, that relationship defines the second half of Closing's corporate history, and it nearly killed the company. After the corporate rename, Closing Industrial changed hands at least once more before crossing the Atlantic. By the early 1980s, the company had been absorbed into Rexnord Incorporated, a large Milwaukee-based industrial conglomerate. Rexnord had no particular attachment to the machine tool business. In the mid-1980s, Rexnord sold Closing Industrial to the 600 Group plc, a historic British engineering conglomerate traded on the AIM stock exchange in London. The exact year of the acquisition is disputed across corporate records. Some sources say 1980, others say 1985, and the Kalamazoo Public Library records the sale as 1986. What is certain is that it happened, and it fundamentally altered the trajectory of the company. The 600 Group had built the UK's dominant machine tool operation through the acquisition of Colchester Lathes in 1954 and T.S. Harrison in 1971, and later added Pratt Bernard International and the Gamut Bearings division. Acquiring Closing gave the 600 Group a North American anchor with an established service network and a brand name that American machinists trusted. The fit looked perfect. Closing became the distribution and support arm for Colchester and Harrison products across the Americas, while the combined engineering resources strengthened every product line. For years, the arrangement worked. But by the late 2010s, the entire enterprise was being strangled by a problem that had nothing to do with machines. The 600 Group was carrying a legacy-defined benefit pension scheme covering 2,000 pensioners and 800 deferred members, a relic of the mid-20th century British manufacturing workforce. The gross liability of that pension scheme had reached £201 million, roughly $270 million. For a company the size of the 600 Group, the debt was wildly disproportionate. It suppressed the share price, choked liquidity, and threatened the viability of every subsidiary, including Closing. In July of 2018, the 600 Group's executive chairman Paul Dupuy and the board engineered a full insurance buyout of the pension scheme with the Pension Insurance Corporation. The deal offloaded the entire $270 million liability to the insurance sector. When the transaction completed in May of 2019, a surplus of £4.1 million, about $5.2 million after tax, was returned to the 600 Group to fund working capital and product development. It was a clean escape from a debt that could have buried the company. But the financial strain had forced a strategic pivot. The 600 Group determined that its future lay in its rapidly growing industrial laser division, not in traditional heavy iron. In April of 2022, the 600 Group made the decision to divest its entire Machine Tool Solutions division, comprising Closing Industrial, Colchester, Harrison, and Pratt Bernard. The buyer was Time Savers Acquisition, LLC, a portfolio company of TJM Capital Partners, a Chicago-based private equity firm founded in 2008 by Tom McDonough. The cash price was $21 million. The acquisition cleanly severed Closing from its UK corporate burdens and returned the brand to independent American leadership for the first time in decades. TJM organized its industrial holdings under a platform called Encompass, and the company list reads like a Hall of Fame of American metalworking. Alongside Closing, the platform includes Time Savers, Bourne, and Koch, and, in a twist that would have amused Paul Closing, the Bridgeport Machine Tool Company, the same brand whose full-size knee mills the Closing 8520 was originally designed to compete against. Colchester and Pratt Bernard also came over in the deal, keeping the transatlantic partnership intact. Under this new ownership, Closing's modern product catalog has expanded well beyond the manual lathes that built the brand. The line now includes the CT Series precision tool room lathes, engineered to hold tolerances down to 50 millionths of an inch for medical device and aerospace work. The Storm series of vertical machining centers and the SB8CNC slant bed lathe represent the company's push into computer-controlled manufacturing. But the manual machines haven't been abandoned. The Closing Colchester Typhoon lathes and the Harrison M300 sit in the current catalog alongside the CNC equipment, because plenty of shops still need iron that a skilled operator runs by hand. And that American operation still runs out of Kalamazoo, Michigan, the same city where Gardner Eames built his first arbor press over a century ago. The Closing Service Center, now located on Emerald Drive, exists for a single purpose: keeping Closing machinery operational regardless of when it was built. The facility stocks over 73,000 distinct components. 95% of all parts orders ship within 24 hours. The operation supplies replacement bronze half-nuts, lead screws, gears, and drive belts for machines like the 5900 series lathes and the 8520 mills that rolled off the line more than 50 years ago. In an industry where planned obsolescence is the business model, Closing's Service Center is a deliberate act of defiance. The machine was built to outlast its operator. The parts supply exists to make sure it does. That philosophy extends beyond commercial manufacturing. Technical schools, university engineering programs, and vocational workshops around the world have standardized their curricula on Closing and Colchester equipment. When the Scarborough University Technical College in the UK opened its training facility in 2016, it filled the shop floor with Colchester Student 2500 center lathes, Closing 2 VS turret mills, and Pratt Bernard super precision chucks. The principal stated plainly that the school wanted machines matching the exact standard used by local aerospace and engineering employers so that students could walk straight from the classroom into industry without retraining. Paul Closing never saw any of this. He died in Ottumwa on March 15, 1973, 15 years after his brother and his lathes left town. He went back to painting. He went back to mechanical tinkering, including a stint manufacturing supermarket price markers. He spent his final years in the same Iowa town where he and Hilda had bought that cramped 2,000-square-foot building in the worst year of the Great Depression. Hilda outlived him by 18 years. But here is what survived all of them. Not the company. Companies get sold, merged, split apart, and suffocated by pension obligations in countries the founder never visited. What survived Paul Closing was the iron. A 5900 series lathe, manufactured in Warsaw, Indiana, sometime in the early 1970s, is still cutting metal in a shop somewhere right now. The spindle bearings haven't been replaced. The bed hasn't been reground. The lead screw still tracks true. And if a gear breaks tomorrow, the service center in Kalamazoo will pick the replacement part, pack it, and ship it the same day. The company that bought him changed its name to match his. The machines he designed outlived him by half a century, and counting. And the operation that supports those machines still answers the phone. That is the story of Closing Industrial, the farm kid from Iowa who built iron that refused to die.